rootbound plants. Ooh, scary stuff. So, how do you know if your plants are rootbound? A couple of things you can look at. If your plant wilts very quickly, it's probably rootbound. Suddenly stops growing, probably rootbound. Stop producing flowers all of a sudden, probably rootbound. Or if you see roots growing on top of the soil, it's probably rootbound. One of the best ways to find out, if you can, is to take the pot, turn it over, and see if there are any roots growing out of the drainage holes. If you see roots growing out of the drainage holes, it is most certainly rootbound. If you have them in plastic containers, they may even bulge due to the roots trying to push outwards. So that's another way to tell that your plant is rootbound. If you notice that your container has misshapen itself, it's likely due to the plant being rootbound inside of the pot. Being rootbound is good and bad, depending on how you look at it. It's good because it lets you know that your plant is extremely healthy. Obviously, it's still producing its roots and foliage on top. It's bad because your plant is letting you know that it has outgrown the pot or the container that it's in. It's pretty much ready to move out into bigger, better things, and it needs your help. Another thing to note with root-bound plants, you want to be careful about pot-bound plants. It's pretty much the same thing, but in this case, the roots have conformed to a certain shape of the pot, and then you can't get it out. I probably shouldn't tell you this. You know what? We're friends, right? We're friends. I tell you not to waterlog your soil. You stop by, we hang out, we talk about plants. I think this is a comfortable place. I have actually done that. I had to break open a very nice big clay pot. I couldn't eat for days after this. I was really traumatized by this, but I didn't plan accordingly. I bought a gardenia that I found on clearance, so I had to buy it. It started to do very well. It was coming back. I put it in this pot that had a little bell shape towards the bottom, and the top was tapered, so it looked like one of those little Roman ceramic jugs. It was a really cool looking pot. However, I didn't realize that my gardenia was doing that well. It was dark green foliage, it had nice big white blooms, extremely fragrant. It was ideal for gardenias. Then it suddenly stopped producing flowers, and the flower buds would even fall off. I was wondering, why would that happen all of a sudden? Eventually, I got down and looked to see if the drainage hole had been stopped up. And when I got and looked under there, the roots were coming out of the drainage hole and trying to grow into the ground. So of course I immediately thought, oh, I'll just take it out of this pot, put it in another pot. Nope. 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 And nope again. Turns out that the roots created a ball shape like this bulb, and I could not get them out of the rim. So it literally had to take a hammer and a screwdriver and crack open this really nice big clay pot because the gardenia became pot bound or root bound inside of this pot. So that's a sad story, and hopefully I don't have to tell you any more of those. So be mindful of that. If you grab a pot or a container that has a certain shape, you want to make sure that if you're going to put that plant in there, you plan on it being in there forever, or you want to make sure that you take the plant out before it grows too big for the pot. If it grows too big, you're going to be stuck with that decision. Either you leave it in there forever and hope that maybe one day it'll push out flowers again, or you're going to have to break that very nice pot. So keep that in mind. So the obvious solution would be to remove the plant from the pot and put it in a bigger pot. It has obviously outgrown that pot. So when you do that, you want to be careful with the roots. You don't want to traumatize them too much. You'll see stuff about breaking up the roots and all of that. Yeah, you don't necessarily need to do that. You can pull a few roots apart, but you don't want to get in there and cause the plant more trauma. Because remember, you do have to transplant it, so there's transplant shock. It's still going to be trying to reserve nutrients, so you don't want to stress the plant out too much just by playing with its roots. As far as the pot bound or root bound pots, the first step you want to do is dig around the edges of the plant. And by doing that, you'll release a little bit of pressure as well as make a little room to try to slide the plant out. A lot of times they're going to be difficult to get out. If they're in plastic containers, you can just kind of squeeze the containers. If you do that, you should be able to knock the plant right out. Just kind of tilt it on the side and let it fall out. If, however, you're in one of the ceramic pots, I would say take the time to slowly dig out as much soil as you can around the edges and try to lift the plant out or let it slide out. So a couple of plants that I've had to transplant recently, What you're looking at here is a Japanese magnolia, and we had it in this black grower's pot, and it did extremely well for about the first year. We didn't think about putting it in another pot because this was another clearance plant, but leaving it in that pot for a year, this is the result. The big gray pot is what it's going to go into, but the small black pot is what it was in. Look at those roots. One major mistake we forgot here about this perennial is that it's a tree. Of course it's going to grow fast. Of course it's going to have an extensive root system. We just didn't plan for that initially. Now I know better. And you can see the roots here, extremely healthy roots. There's very little soil in there, so this would probably qualify as very root bound. When you get to a plant that has little to no soil at all, it is extremely root bound. More than likely you haven't seen flowers in a long time and the plant hasn't grown taller at all. It is barely surviving. And this is also a reason why you'll see it wilt so quickly. There is no soil to retain any moisture. This little guy here was just a sucker off of one of our banana plants on the other side. We put it in this small pot to let it grow, and it grew actually really fast. Actually, it grew so fast we had to transplant it soon. This is it now. It went into a bigger pot, and it's already ready for another big pot. You can see it became root bound fairly quickly. It already took the shape of it. Look at those roots. Some of those are really big. It already took the shape of the little grower's pot that we used for that. You can see how one was ready to start slipping out of the bottom there. There's like a little crew there that was ready to escape. So with this banana plant, I noticed that it started to brown and it stopped putting out leaves. Usually it'll put out a set of leaves every couple of weeks, but for some reason it stopped. This is also a good time to pull out some weeds and junk that may be stuck in there. But since it stopped growing and stopped putting out leaves, I thought maybe something was wrong with the plant. I go turn it over, and lo and behold, there were roots coming out of the bottom. So I found another pot, and with this one, it's just slightly bigger, not too big. You don't want to give it a huge pot to grow into. Give it something just a few inches bigger. Give it time to grow. If you notice that it's growing fast, which that does happen, then of course it's time to transplant it again. So here I'm just going to put some soil down, just as padding, just something to sit it on top of, and then we're just going to plop this bad boy right in there. And if you'll notice, you can see that I have about an inch or so worth of space on the outside on the perimeter. That, all I'm going to do is knock off some soil on the top to fill in those, and then I'll backfill with some fresh soil. And then after we get some fresh soil in there, you just want to shake the pot a little bit, not too hard, just enough so that the soil starts to fall into place. Try to get rid of any air pockets. And once the soil settles, you should be good to go. Now, if your roots were nice and wet, then I wouldn't suggest watering the plants. But if they were dry, then you definitely want to give it a nice watering with the new transplant. So after transplanting this little lady here, she now looks like this. And you'll notice the brown that it shed off. That's what alerted me to the plant having a problem. It was turning brown on the outside, and now that it's been transplanted, this is about 2 weeks later, it shed that off, it grew a little bit taller, and big, healthy leaves. Now, again, keep in mind, this is a banana plant, so I know for sure that these grow really fast. So I'm already planning within about the next 2 months to put it into a bigger pot. I don't want to put it into the ground here. I want to keep it somewhere where people can see it. So I'm probably just going to put it in a nice, preferably cheap, big pot. Now, this would be a case of being severely root bound. Look at that. There's little to no soil, and if there's any soil in there, the plant is holding on to it for dear life. Now, looking at these, you could separate these a little bit. I would probably separate maybe just the bottom 2 inches of roots. Just kind of put your hands in there and pull them apart. Try not to break any of these roots. These are very tender. You can cause your plant a lot of stress. Take your time. If you don't feel confident removing those roots, then don't. The roots will seek out nutrients. They'll reform themselves. They'll spread out. You just want to make sure you are not traumatizing the roots while the plant's transplanted. So these are actually lilies of the Nile. We don't remember where we bought them or if we bought them. They just kind of started growing back in a pot. So we put them in 2 little clay pots that we had, 2 little matching pots. They stayed in those pots for a little over a year. We really didn't pay attention to it. It was just out front. And then I decided, why don't we put these in cooler pots and see what they turn into? And when I go to take them out of the pots, that's what they look like. Severely root bound, which explains why they stopped growing. I should have been a dead giveaway there. And a lot of the material that it's holding on to, I don't want to disturb that. I don't want to take all of that stuff off. Let it keep whatever it has going on. We just want to give it more space so that it can continue to grow. And these are those two little pots that they were in, the two little blue pots here. They're really cool looking pots. Not great for the plant. And these are the pots that they are going to go in. It's about twice the size, twice the depth, more width. So you can see here how much more space that the lilies will have. And for the bottom of these, I'm just going to fill it up with probably about a quarter of the way with like some twigs, sticks, things like that, some tree bark, just some of that kind of organic material, something that also stops the soil from being compacted inside of the pot. And this is what they look like a couple weeks later. They grew 3 times the size. I still ended up moving them because I noticed some yellowing, and that was because of excess moisture. So these plants like full sun, very little moisture. Weird, I know, but that's what they like. Put them in a sunny spot, make sure they have pots big enough for those roots to shoot out, and you will love your lilies. This little project here is a double begonia. I have 2 of them. I don't know why they chose double instead of double. Double begonia sounds way cooler than double, but they chose double. Double usually means just 2 similar things, and I'm assuming it's because the plant shoots out 2 flowers on the end of the stalk. I don't know, it was just really pretty. I like it. But these stayed in their stock pots, and you can see here, just going to put them into something a little bit bigger, give them a little bit more room, and plus it's a more sturdy hanging pot. These do get really big. Actually, after I transplanted these, I've already decided to put them in bigger pots on the ground. And again, here you can see the size difference from the stock pot versus the new pot. So it's not a huge difference, it's slightly bigger. It gives the plant time to grow, adds a little bit more soil, more room for it. And like I said, this is a more sturdy hanging pot, so it can handle the weight because they do get a little heavy. And after about 2 weeks, you can see the foliage got darker. It turned to this really dark green, and the plants changed color. They were the same color of blush and pink, but one got a darker red trim and the other one just got bigger flowers. So I was really happy with that. So that's why you want to transplant your plants out of those stock pots. And these are caladiums. These guys have been in those pots, I want to say close to 20 years. And if you'll notice, this one that is big and fluffy, this was an experiment. We gave it some bone meal to test out the fertilizer, and I want to say it worked. Look at that, a lot of new growth underneath there, super healthy from that. Even in this pot where it's root bound. The other one that didn't get bone meal, well, I don't know. We won't talk about that. So I brought these 2 caladiums over here. These are the same ones that you saw over there by the fire pit before. We brought those over here so that we can transplant them. Even though they're in very cool containers, they have been in those containers for a long time. And if you've been in Florida weather for a long time, you may be a little beat up yourself. So you can see why we're going to go ahead and change them out. They're just starting to deteriorate and fall apart from the weather. So it's time to go. And plus, I believe these ladies deserve a new home. But they have a lot of growth in there. So these will be their new homes. Much, much bigger pots. Also, I'm not sure who bought raised bed soil. I'm not into raised beds. Just not, I guess I'm just not hipster enough for that. But I found the soil, and I am a firm believer in the Constitution and the doctrine of finders keepers. So those are going to go in bigger pots. And this is about 2 weeks later. We put the pots out front, and you can see here they just loved it. They got very bushy. We had a lot of new growth. The plants really love having that extra space. Solved the problem, and we made the neighbors kind of jealous. This poor lady here is a Duranta. Normally they're called sapphire showers. The pot broke by accident, and I don't know how long you've been living in the adult world, but apparently no one knows anything. No one knows how it broke. No one knows why it broke. It just broke. I came to fix it. But you can see our Duranta had this little issue here. It's actually a good thing that the pot broke, because that let me know that it was root bound. Now that I think about it, it could possibly be that it was root bound, the pressure pushing outward on the pot. I guess it kind of jeopardizes the integrity of the pot. So if something hits the pot, instant break, because there's already pressure coming from the inside. So seeing that it was severely root bound, decided to get her a nice big pot, because what I learned from the magnolia, it's a tree. Yeah, it's gonna grow fast. So we got her into a new pot, and she loved it. Nice big black pot. I think this thing was probably less than $20 from Lowe's or something like that. And a month later, we had flowers again. It started to grow like crazy. I am almost certainly convinced that it is root bound again. Yeah, it's either time to go on the ground or it's time to buy a very expensive, very big pot for this one. But I do like that it brought back flowers and it brought back butterflies. You can't beat that. So keep in mind, if your plant is wilting quickly, if it's suddenly not growing, if it stops producing flowers, or if you see roots growing out of the top or out of the bottom of the pots, it is root bound. It's time to get it into a bigger, better pot, and it's time to have bigger, better flowers. When you take it out of the pot, remember, dig around the edges first and try to give it some room to slide out. You may have to use a little bit of muscle, but be careful once you get down to the roots. When you do go ahead and transplant it, if you decide to pull some of the roots apart, be very conservative about that. Don't disturb the roots too much. It'll be fine when you transplant it. Don't listen to the horror stories. Put it in a new pot or put it in the ground. Make sure that it is watered properly. Give it a little bit of fertilizer. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe there are some things to help with transplant shock. So you might want to look into that as well. A lot of times it's not necessary. Once you just get them into better soil in a bigger area, they kind of take care of themselves. But we want to minimize transplant shock, so don't mess with the roots too much. Separate maybe the bottom 2 inches if you need to, but that should be enough. And kind of like with this one, when we took this guy out of here, this is a ground orchid. I think it was just planted in the wrong medium. For some reason, I don't think these do well in soil at all. But if you look at the roots here, they're very moist, very soggy, and I don't think this was a good idea to put a ground orchid in this kind of potting soil. But this one here, I am going to shake it out a little bit, and you see how I'm shaking it here? I can feel where the roots get a little bit more sturdy, so I'm not going to go beyond that point. I'm going to shake out the soil where it lets the roots go. Once I start feeling any kind of resistance from the plant, that's when we stop. So we're just going to put this ground orchid in a bigger pot. We're going to put some organic material in there. The same thing with the lilies of the Nile. We're going to put in some sticks, some twigs, things like that, just so it has something for the roots to wrap around and also something to stop the soils from being compacted in there. Well, I hope this helps you solve your root-bound plant problem, and I hope you get a promotion this week. If you need any other help, please feel free to stop by. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.